Hello, my name is Elizabeth Kaye, and I'm happy to welcome you back to the First Guild and our new and unique program, Ballet and Identity. Whether you're seeking to be a ballet dancer or not, ballet is an extraordinary tool that has the capacity to raise your consciousness and take you to a greater version of who you are. Through ballet, you can shape your body, of course, but beyond that, you can shape your life. Now, how does ballet do that? By connecting you, as you'll learn today, with your innate qualities, with your physical and mental and emotional potential. Ballet will give you newfound capacity that you can apply to every aspect of your life and your ambitions. And the First Guild's Ballet and Identity program is the pathway to realizing these life-enhancing outcomes. Today, we're focusing on a subject that is at the core of the Ballet and Identity program, the profound benefits that can be derived from a ballet education. And I am thrilled to be discussing this topic with the remarkable Lesley Carothers. I met Lesley 10 years ago when she was the leading teacher and administrator of the dance program of the Colburn School here in Los Angeles. That significant role followed her stunning career as a principal dancer with the Joffrey Company, the Joffrey Ballet Company, which is one of the world's greatest ballet companies. As a ballerina, Lesley performed at absolute peak level as both an artist and an athlete. She truly lit up the stage and was one of the loveliest and most elegant yet sensuous ballerinas I have ever seen. What makes her unique, it was told by the artistic director and choreographer, Gerald Arpino. This is what he said. She represents the American beauty, the American girl in dance. And so welcome, Lesley. And,
so much,
and I will start by asking you, how did you discover ballet?
I was about to turn 4 years old, and I remember seeing something that involved ballet on television. And I was mesmerized by this image and began dancing around the house, my mother tells me, begging for ballet lessons. So as I was just turning 4 years old, she found a program in our local Parks and Recreation in Duarte, California, a very small foothill community in California. And that's where my studies began.
And what kind of things did you dance as a little tiny girl?
I remember very specifically, I was a wee winter tree. My mother made a costume so that we looked like Christmas trees.
Oh, that's nice.
And there's photographs to prove it. We were also tulips and would grow from the ground with water and sun. It was very creative, very imaginative program, and I loved it.
And I believe that on the final day, there were some awards handed out.
Yes, they felt it important that every child received an award at the end of the program. So one by one, we got up and received our award, and mine was a blue ribbon for most improved, which makes me laugh because it might be a left-handed compliment, but I was so proud of that ribbon, and I had it hanging in my room for many years.
Oh, that's so adorable, really. And then at the age of 5, you took another step in your ballet journey.
Yes, it became clear that I wanted to continue, and I was obviously improving. So my mother found a local ballet school run by a woman named Marilia Walsh, and I began a little bit more formal ballet classes. And she was a very good teacher. She had us doing a lot of strengthening and stretching work on the floor, I remember. And she made very imaginative little ballets for us to perform.
And didn't you do something like an Arabian coochie coo dance or something like that?
Yes, it involved hands like this. I do remember that and being actually a little bit shy about it. And my favorite was a Swedish polka. with a very cute costume that, once again, my mother sewed. I kept her
polka dots on your polka costume. Did you have polka dots?
I did have polka dots and musical notes. It was
Yeah.
actually lovely. And we got to perform here and there. And that sort of whet my appetite for performing as well.
And then at the age of 8, you may get another step forward.
Yes. At that point, my mother and I discussed the idea of going to more of a career track school. And so she had heard of a ballet school, Limon Dance Center in Pasadena, run by Evelyn Limon. And there was a very good regional, non-professional company attached to it, the Pasadena Dance Theater. And so one of the reasons that it was attractive was that this school was actually producing quite a good number of professional dancers. So it was quite a long drive, and I just can't thank my mother enough for all of those long car trips, taking me to ballet, waiting for me, and taking me home. I really fell in love with the process and the work of ballet, as well as just the fun and imagination at this school, because the demands were high. We were expected to work very hard. Evelyn Limon was a wonderful teacher, and my other teacher, Ted Welsh, was extremely good for physical grounding and preparation work for the foundations that I would need.
You know, it's interesting to me with ballet teachers. When I took ballet 100 years ago, the teacher was a Russian teacher who literally walked around the room with a ruler, which she slammed you with when your arm was in the wrong place or your leg or whatever. But I do think that the teachers who expect a lot, the teachers who expect you to be little tiny professionals, are the teachers that do you the most good. Do you know what I mean?
I would agree completely. And I was so fortunate to find that school at that moment, because that's exactly what they gave me.
And I believe in the beginning, weren't you, your ballet trajectory there was at one point, your first role, I think, was as a headache?
Yes, I was a headache.
How do you dance a headache?
Let me explain further. Evelyn Limon was a very gifted choreographer, and she made a full-length ballet. Decided that everyone else was doing the Nutcracker, so we would do something else at the holidays. And it was it was the Bluebird of Happiness by Maeterlinck. And she made this very beautiful creative ballet, full-length ballet, music by Prokofiev and Mussorgsky, and lots of roles for the tiny ones all the way up to the just about professional dancers, the older dancers. And there was one moment where a sort of Pandora's box is opened and the ills of the world come out. And I was one of those ills. I was a headache. And
how do you do a headache like that?
I had a bandage on my head and I was doing all of this. And then what was lovely about that ballet is that you were allowed to progress from one role to the next, and finally I did end up dancing the Bluebird role itself. So,
and you danced the Bluebird, right? I mean, it was the leading role.
I did. So,
yeah. After how many years? When did you get to be the Bluebird?
I would say between ages 8 to 16 when I left. So somewhere near the end of that time.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love that. And by this point, had you begun to forge an identity in ballet?
Yes, I think that the grounding I had coming from a strong and secure family allowed me to enter this world without fear. And I think that I was fearless from the beginning. And I realized very early on that I loved the time in the studio just as much as I loved the time on stage. My friends were there. I had a community that was so strong and supportive. We had a lot of fun in those rehearsals and those classes. And I loved each step of the way. When I got my first pointe shoes, how exciting that was. Each of those things, each of these landmarks along the way forged my identity as someone who wasn't afraid to work and found pleasure along the way.
And also as someone who loved ballet. I mean, I think that's a big part of the identity that you had at that point.
Oh, it was a complete love story from day one, really.
Yeah. So
There was no turning back.
you know, it's interesting that another part of the whole ballet and identity concept is this idea of connection, which you were just alluding to, which is that when you have an identity, you know, a core sense of who you are, you very easily begin to connect with other people who feel as you do and make a sense of community, all of people who are identifying in a particular way. And I think that's what you had with your fellow dancers it sounds like from a very early age.
I did, and I think that we were coming together for the right reasons. It was a shared love of something rather than a need from someone else. We felt like whole people ourselves, and we're able to then just share in the delight of that with each other.
And then I think as it became your community, you had this National Regional Dance Association that you would do each year.
Yes, Regional Dance Association, which I believe it's changed its name to now. My company was the Pasadena Dance Theater, as I mentioned. There were many small quality companies all through the Pacific states, all the way up to Washington and all the way down to San Diego. So there was an idea to bring the companies from each region together once a year for a weekend of master classes and performances and cross-pollination, really. These were the highlight of my year. And we would be adjudicated. Adjudicator would come and choose one of our ballets from our repertoire. And if you were lucky enough to be chosen, you would then get to perform it on one of, I believe it was 3 performance opportunities, including a gala the last night. And the camaraderie and the connections, once again, that were built. Some of the people I met at these yearly events remain friends for the rest of my life, and very dear friends. So it was really eye-opening, because you were not the only fish in the pond. There was a much bigger pond and many more fish, and very exciting to get to perform for each other.
Was there a sense of competition among people or any jealousy or anything like that?
Truly, I do not remember any instances of that particularly rearing its head. I think we were also very excited to be in this place. It was in Seattle one year, I was in Pasadena another. You would travel, you would stay in a hotel, you would have parties with the other dancers. It really was a joyful event. And I think all of the competition had already happened, the adjudication. So right. We were there to just support each other, watch each other, enjoy each other, and learn.
And really forge ever more strongly that sense of connection.
Absolutely.
You know. So now you were 13 when you did a summer course at San Francisco Ballet. And then the next summer you went to New York for the summer program of American Ballet Theater. What was that like for you?
San Francisco Ballet was the first time I'd been away from home by myself. And I stayed at a convent. So my parents knew I was pretty well watched after. And it was my first exposure to really a professional dance school, in the sense that it was associated with a professional company. There were some wonderful teachers, some of them very scary. And it was just a big step up in the focus and seriousness needed to succeed in that environment. The next year, I was a little bit more ready for this experience, and that was New York City and American Ballet Theater's summer intensive program. It was a thrilling time. First, to experience New York for the first time, that big, wonderful city, and I was instantly infatuated and knew I wanted to come back. And I had a wonderful family to stay with. John Gruen, who was and is a very well-known dance historian, author, writer. He had a radio show. He's written some seminal books on a variety of dancers in history. And he was my host for this initiation into New York. And he took me to the ballet and he introduced me to Rudolf Nureyev and really taught me how to take the subway. He was very fatherly, but also very inspiring.
You know, it's really interesting. Talk about connection. I mean, you end up, you know, having a spare room at John Gruen's house, I think because his daughter had moved away at that point.
That's right.
And to connect with John Gruen, who was so integral to the ballet community, and then to have him introduce you. I mean, Nureyev at that time, we're talking about 1976, was in a way still at the height of his powers and was, in my opinion, my humble opinion, one of the two most thrilling dancers in the entire world. But you also got to see the other thrilling dancer, which was Baryshnikov, because I think that was the year they were filming The Turning Point. Isn't that right? The movie The Turning Point with Baryshnikov. So did you get to see I think you got to see him working on that a bit.
Yes, we were told, all of us students, this was the old ABT studios, that we were told that this film was being made and that they would be in and out of the studios while we were there that summer, which was just incredible. And we knew that Lesley Brown and Mikhail Baryshnikov were starring in this epic dance film. And yes, we did get to see some of the activities around that film being made. And we were actually in the film. Shirley MacLaine, there was a scene, unfortunately, that ended up on the cutting room floor, but she was our ballet teacher in this scene, and we were taking a ballet class from her. So we got to meet her as well. The other scene, which did stay in the movie, was a lot of us young students piling into a doorway to watch raptly as we watched Misha Baryshnikov and Lesley Brown rehearsing.
Yeah, that's really so wonderful. And so, I mean, to have that experience, especially with that film, because I must say, I know so many people, so many male dancers who became dancers because they saw that film. And when they saw that film and that Baryshnikov was, you know, a real guy and he's a ballet dancer, they suddenly thought it's okay to be a ballet dancer. And so a lot of really fine dancers, Ethan Stiefel, Angel Correa, all sorts of dancers became dancers because they went to see The Turning Point, you know. Now, with John Gruen also, I mean, to have that kind of connection would have been, you were thrust into a world really in a way beyond your years by hanging out with John Gruen.
And his wife, who was a very gifted artist in her own right. She was a painter, Jane. And so, yes, I was in this very heady Upper West Side artistic milieu at 14, coming straight from a very small town in Southern California. So it was an extraordinary, I would say, run of luck for me to be there that summer and under those circumstances.
And have those connections.
Absolutely.
But of course, then after the summer, you went home.
I did, yes. My parents understood that I wanted to pursue this as a career, ballet, but we agreed as a family that I should finish high school first.
And that's really important, I think, because by then, okay, you have your ballet identity. But the thing about identity is it's not just that you have a soul identity. I mean, you had an identity as a ballet dancer by then, but also as a daughter, as a student. And I just think that it's so important to realize that when you connect with something you really love and you begin to develop your identity, you're developing identity not just as this thing or that thing, but as a whole being, you know, open to loving academics and community and friends and family. And to me, you really personify that, because as much as any dancer I know, you really stayed connected to your family, to your school, and all of those things in a way that I think helped you tremendously as time went on.
It did. I think it gave me the foundation, the grounding, and the well-roundedness, I suppose, to then enter this very challenging sometimes world of ballet with a lot of competition and the big city and all the rest, all of these challenges. I was able to come to that with a sense of groundedness. That's the word I keep coming back to. I was very happy to finish high school where I was. It was a very normal high school with football games and dances, and I had wonderful friends who are still to this day my best friends, my group from high school days. And I would never have been, I think, able to pursue my dream in the same way if I hadn't had that other part of me having time to have it be so nurtured.
Because it gave you, because identity, when you have that identity, it does give you a core, a core of being. And from that core of being, you can stretch out and do all sorts of amazing things, like become a ballerina at a major company. It's just, it gives you that. And also, I think for you, and probably for most people, if they're lucky enough to have that all embracing identity. I'm a daughter, I'm a student, I'm a friend, I'm a ballet dancer. When you have that, it doesn't put too much pressure on any one thing. I feel sorry for the people who, if you want to be a ballet dancer and everything is about ballet and it has to be ballet, that can get very difficult. But when you use your ballet identity to make the connections that take you beyond it, it only comes back to help your ballet identity.
You're absolutely right, Elizabeth. And you said something a moment ago that really struck a chord. You talked about having this core inside of you that is your identity, which then enables you to blossom and grow in all kinds of directions. And that is literally physically what happens in the body as a ballet dancer. We build a very strong core and center and spine. The spine is strong and it's long and our center is firm, and that allows great freedom of expression. So it's very much
a great metaphor. So the ballet body itself is the metaphor for what the ballet mind needs to do.
Absolutely.
That's fascinating. I love that. Just go through that again so people will really get it completely. Start with the core, go to the spine, and just run through that one more time, because it's so important.
Well, the entire technique of classical ballet is built around a strong center, or our core. Comes from the word corset, which was used in the very first ballets in these costumes. To hold your center strong, and feel your spine long. And what do we talk about when we talk about having a backbone in life? Yes, well, we are developing exactly that in classical ballet, a backbone and posture and a strong center. And when you have those things, the rest of your body can be free to do anything and to be very expressive at the same time. If that center is strong and it holds strong, there's absolutely no limit to what the body can do.
Because you can branch out in all these different ways. But also for somebody who's not going to be a ballet dancer, to have that ballet training, it gives you also, if your spine is physically strong, that's strengthening for your mind. That's strengthening for your emotions, So it works in all these different ways. I think it's so fascinating what ballet education can do. I mean, I know what it did for me. It gave me an identity without ever becoming a dancer. Because there are just certain ways that I either carry myself or seek to carry myself, ideas I have about myself, they all come back to that strong spine and the core within you that becomes the core. It's your core in the body and the core in your mind and in your heart.
Very beautifully put, Elizabeth.
Thank you. But I mean, so that's what's so fascinating. I mean, that now let's go on. I know your parents were completely supportive of your ballet journey. I mean, of course, they wanted you to finish high school, but it sounds like they were just absolutely wonderful parents.
Though they were both teachers, they understood very early on that I had found a true passion. And I think that in their heart of hearts, they would have imagined and wanted me to go to college after high school immediately and pursue my education, being educators themselves. They understood how strong the passion was in me to continue with ballet. And they also understood that I was getting the kind of feedback and promotions in a way that indicated that I actually might be able to make it. So they did for me the most important thing any parent could do. They said, go follow your dream. We will support you completely. And if it doesn't work, you've got a home to come back to. That really allowed me to have no fear in jumping into the deep end of New York City and beginning to swim.
That's so wonderful. I hope there are a lot of parents listening to this because that's really true. You let the person go, but you also make it very easy for them to come home without any sense of failure, that it's okay. You try what you try and you see how it goes. And if it doesn't work, come back and we'll just go on.
Exactly.
That's just a wonderful one. It makes it so much easier to move forward, doesn't it? When you have that, when you know that.
It felt like a win-win.
Yeah, that's great.
There was no downside.
That's great. So now, when you went to New York again, now you are in Joffrey too.
After coming to live full-time at age 16 in New York, I was on scholarship at the Joffrey Ballet School. And not too long after that, I was taken into the company's farm team, as it was called, Joffrey 2. And that was
Let's explain what that means in terms of how that would feed into the main company, hopefully. Can you tell them about that?
Absolutely. I feel so fortunate that there was a Joffrey 2 because not every company has an apprentice company. And it's the best way to make that jump between being a student and being a professional. It gave us time to work with choreographers, learn how to work in a studio, learn the rigors of a full day as a paid professional. And we toured and performed a lot. We toured all over the country. And it gave us our stage legs, something that's not easy to find if you're just thrown into a major ballet company and immediately you're on the world's largest stages. So I'm
on the world's largest stages with a lot of people who are great dancers. And
yes.
You're not yet, and that has to be very, very daunting. So you were with your peers. So again, you were in a situation of real connection again.
The connection was very palpable because, as I say, we were 12. It was 6 men and 6 women, and we traveled in a bus across America. So you can imagine we spent most of every day together and most of every evening together. And we would find ourselves in very small towns having to make our own fun on our day off. And these, again, became lifelong friends. The bonds that were made on those tours really cannot be overemphasized.
And then I believe the Joffrey was, they're not dancing. And then because they're not dancing, Robert Joffrey, the artistic director of the company, is free to teach you in Joffrey too.
Yes, they were on a brief furlough at that time, the main company, Joffrey Ballet. So he came more often, I think, than he might have had the time to do. In another case, he came to work with us, to teach us classes, to come to see our rehearsals and our performances. So he was already becoming a mentor to us even before we made the move into the Joffrey Ballet. And it was a very educational period to get to know who he was and his expectations. He was a wonderful teacher.
Well, he's also another person who found one of his identities, at least in ballet. It's always been fascinating to me. His father was from Afghanistan, his mother was from Italy, and his birth name was Anvar Bey Abdullah Jaffa Khan. And then he falls in love with dance and he becomes Robert Joffrey. So he was really self-created through this identity that he took on. Wouldn't you say?
I would indeed. I would add to that, though, that I know his roots, his ethnic roots, were very important to him as well. Even
Right.
as he was forging this new identity, I was able to go to his apartment once in Greenwich Village, and he gave us, a small group of us, a tour of his collection. And a lot of that was uh, artifacts and woven things, and from his parents' background, from Afghanistan, from Italy. So it was clear he was very proud of his heritage at the same time.
Well, so that's the double identity thing too. It's that, again, identity doesn't mean you can just choose one thing and be rigidly that. It means that, he had this identity as the son of immigrants. And then from that, he branches out into becoming Robert Joffrey. And the two things can exist side by side together and make, each one can enrich the other.
Absolutely.
So, but as a teacher, he was very kind, right? And human, but very demanding.
Yes, and that's a good combination for a young ballet dancer. That era of hitting people with sticks was over, thank heavens, and it was more the carrot than the stick. He was very specific about what he wanted. That every finger and tilt of the head had to be exactly right, but for good reason. It's because that was the best way to do that step. And in his insistence of that, he actually made us become a cohesive whole, as all of us had come from different schools around the country and different methods of teaching. We were beginning to become a very solidified unit under his guidance and with his teaching.
And so you were 18 when you got into the company, right? That was the beginning. And
Yeah.
what happened once you got in? Did you get roles right away, or how did that work?
Well, one of the things that attracted me to the Joffrey Ballet is it does not have that caste system of principal dancer, soloist, demi-soloist, corps de ballet. We were called the All-Star No-Star Company, and the dancers were listed in alphabetical order. So that meant that everyone had the same chance for roles. And that was very exciting to me. We did actually take a couple of the ballets that were created on us in Joffrey 2 into the main company's repertoire. And so we had roles waiting for us when we joined, which was really extraordinary. And these were roles that were actually created on us. Other than that, though, and rightly so, I started rather slowly with the lesser roles, I would say, which is only appropriate as you are just joining the company. You need time to learn, and you need time to watch the other dancers, watch the senior dancers, learn how to be in this company. So I was very grateful that it was not too much too soon.
And also, by being in the main company, you got to watch these amazing artists like Denise Jackson, Beatrix Rodriguez. That must have been just so inspiring to watch these great, great Joffrey dancers.
It was inspiring, and I was literally in the wings, glued to the stage with my eyes every performance, because I was just like a little sponge. And you mentioned two great artists of the Joffrey Ballet. Denise Jackson was the Taglione of our company. She was the grande dame. She was the prima ballerina assoluto. She floated across the stage with grandeur. And Beatrice Rodriguez was this sensual, earthy, dramatic, passionate dancer who brought the entirely other side of the spectrum to the stage. So what an education to watch those two.
Oh, that, yeah, so great. I mean, it's so interesting how there's sort of these two styles of ballerina. There always have been. You mentioned Taglioni. So she was the first ballerina to dance on point, and she was considered a ballerina en l'air, of the air. And then her big rival was Fanny Elsler, who was also dancing on point back in the late 1820s and 30s and 40s. And she was a dancer a la terre, of the earth, you know? And for men, they have that also, that difference between the Apollonian dancer, the Apollo dancer, which is the blonde Baryshnikov type dancer, and the Dionysian dancer, which is the earthy Nureyev type dancer, you know? So it does divide for both men and women in that really interesting way.
It does, and it reminds me of the Frederick Ashton Ballet Illuminations that we danced. There were two female leads, sacred and profane.
Right, exactly.
Embodying those exact traits that you were just describing.
Well, it's interesting because back in the day when Taglioni and Elsa were dancing, it was said that Taglioni was a Christian dancer and Elsa was a pagan dancer. So it's that exact thing. Now, you also worked at the Joffrey with one of the most inventive choreographers, William Forsythe.
Yes, and that was fairly early. I think that was 1982. So about 2 years into my time with the Joffrey Ballet, Robert Joffrey invited William Forsythe, who had become quite a big name in Europe, American choreographer, but he had been working in Frankfurt, Germany, and was doing incredibly creative, groundbreaking work, but his work had not been seen really at all in the United States. So Robert Joffrey invited him to come and stage one of the ballets he'd already created in Europe, and it was called Love Songs. And it was Dionne Warwick and Aretha Franklin songs, all of which are huge classics. And he chose me to dance one of the leads, one of those solos. And it was mind-bending to me, first of all, to be chosen by this extremely accomplished choreographer, but also to move in a way I'd never moved before. He got things out of us we had no idea we had in. And he had such a way of sort of encouraging us to do more and yet more and maybe more and make it fun so that you surprised yourself on a daily basis. And I was so thrilled when Robert Joffrey asked him to come back several years later to choreograph a larger piece and to make that on us. And I was also featured in that ballet. It was called Square Deal.
The make them on us, what make it on us phrase, I'll just explain for people who don't know what that means. It means that a choreographer is actually creating a ballet with dancers who are in the room. It's a ballet that hasn't existed before, and he's creating it on, as they say, on their bodies, with their bodies would be the more usual way of saying it, but it's with their bodies. And there's nothing, I don't think there's anything for a dancer that's quite as thrilling as having a ballet created on you.
Absolutely, it's what we all dream of.
Yeah, because it's a form of artistic immortality in a way, because whatever you do is what everybody else is going to have to do forever and ever and ever.
And some choreographers, William Forsythe, certainly being one of them, really encouraged collaboration. So we were developing as artists in many ways, not just as dancers, but as co-creators in a new ballet, which was very exciting.
That's thrilling. That's a thrilling thing. Now, I know there was one role that you wanted to dance that you weren't cast in until you kind of pushed it a little bit. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes, we had taken John Cranko's Romeo and Juliet into the repertoire, and I think it's every ballerina's dream to dance the role of Juliet. But I was not initially cast to learn the role, and I think that Robert Joffrey saw that character as being a more petite, just a more petite dancer. I was quite tall, one of the tallest dancers in the company, and he just didn't see me in that role. but I wasn't going to let it lay there. So I asked for a meeting, and he immediately gave me an audience and heard me out, why I thought I could do this role, why I thought I would be able to handle it, and why he should give me the chance. And after I spoke, he said, all right, let's do it. Let's have you learn it. And I really appreciate his being so open to giving me that opportunity, even though I wasn't his first choice.
Well, he wasn't letting you dance it till you learned it, and then he could decide if he felt that you had learned it in a way that entitled you to dance it, right?
Exactly. It was a little bit of a safety net for both of us, truthfully.
Right.
It
Yeah.
was, yeah, learn it, let's see you rehearse it, it's sort of an audition, and then we'll decide for sure. So as you can imagine, I poured myself into that role and learning it and finding my characterization, and I was indeed allowed to perform it. And I did perform the role many times over the course of my career, to my great delight.
Well, it's one of the most, there's almost no other role that's like Juliet. And also with the music is by Prokofiev. And like any great ballet score, that music tells the dancer exactly what they feel. You know, it's almost like you don't need anybody to tell you in words. If you just listen to the music, it's all there, and it's so gorgeous. But also, then I know that after the first performance, you have a little photograph that memorializes how Mr. Joffrey felt.
Yes, we were, I believe, at a after performance party of some kind, and it was one of the biggest days of my entire life. The fact that I had just danced my first Juliet, it was at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles, and we are next to each other and sort of locking hands a little bit, and I'm holding flowers, and we're both beaming.
Wonderful. So he was such an amazing person in so many ways. And I'm wondering if you can talk about him a bit as a teacher and as an educator and as a mentor for personal development.
Yes, he cared about his dancers very much. He cared about educating us because he knew that we were going to be the future generation that would need to carry on his work and the work of preserving this art form we all loved. So he made very sure that we understood everything about his repertoire choices, and those choices were brilliant. And he would sit us down at the very beginning of each season and tell us about why he chose a piece, its historical significance, what was happening in the world at the time, why is it still resonating today. So we really had a bigger context for everything we were dancing. If it was a new choreographer, he would tell us, you know, there's this new exciting choreographer I just saw performing in a loft space in Soho, and I think she's doing incredibly important work, and we are going to let her create on us. And how wonderful is that? And so we were just really educated and inspired simultaneously by his brilliant curation of repertoire.
I think when he brought in Twyla Tharp's Deuce Coupe, that was the first time that Twyla had a piece danced by a ballet company.
Indeed.
And didn't he say to you all that it's very groundbreaking, and if you're not comfortable doing it, you don't have to do it? Isn't that what happened?
I believe that when I was in the Joffrey Ballet, we did Deuce Coupe 2, and it was a revival.
Right.
So the original Deuce Coupe was done on the Joffrey Ballet, created for that company by Twyla Tharp before I was there. That was about a generation before. And yes, I believe he did tell the dancers that. He knew that there was going to be some mumbling because here are these incredibly trained classical dancers asked to basically bebop around the stage to Beach Boys music while graffiti artists were spray painting the backdrop. So not everyone was on board, I suppose, but those that decided to stay and see it out, that piece became absolutely legendary. And of course, Twyla Tharp became absolutely legendary. So I applaud those who stayed open to this very new experience.
And also Mr. Joffrey for giving her Twyla that opportunity, because he was the first to do that.
And he had an eye. He could look at 20 different emerging choreographers and know which one to pick. And he was almost unerring in that respect.
That's an amazing bit of, I don't know, fortune telling or something.
Yes. Vision, educated vision, I would say.
Educated vision, that's much better. Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. You know, the other thing that interests me about what he did, because I've not heard about this in other companies, is the way he taught you all how to present yourselves and how always to look your best and to represent the company. I think that's really, I love that, because it's so, I mean, he was often in a suit, right? Almost always in a suit, and very, very dapper. And just that idea of, you know, especially at that time in the 1980s, which was sort of, I mean, it was, I don't know, it was still sort of like, still a lot of hippie people floating around, you know, and artists were still pretty hippie-ish. And so to say, you know, you should always be well groomed and you should always look your best. I think that's a wonderful thing that he gave you, because it's about self-respect, not just respect, and respect for the fact that you're representing an organization that matters. Isn't that?
And an art form that matters.
And an art form that matters. Yeah. Because dancers do look like dancers. I mean, it's sort of, if you see somebody who looks like a ballet dancer, they probably are, right? So it's kind of, so yes, to have people, but I don't think they do that in any other company. I've never heard of that.
No, I've never heard of it either, but I think it was an important message to hear and lesson to learn, that when you are in a dance studio, in the Joffrey Ballet in New York City, or you're at the airport with the company waiting to get on a plane in the middle of a tour, you are always representing the company. So if you are looking sloppy and unkempt, then it shows a certain lack of regard for your organization. And sure enough, we all looked really good on tour.
That's great. Another wonderful thing that happened with the Joffrey was the Broadway appearances with Rudolph Nureyev. And can you tell us a bit about that? Because that's, and also people can actually see those things because you can go on YouTube and see them because they were all filmed.
Yes, I really have had the most extraordinary luck in my career. I was in the Joffrey 2. I hadn't even moved up to the main company. The main company had just returned, started to work again, and they signed on, I believe it was 4 weeks, with Rudolph Nureyev on Broadway, in a Broadway theater, the Mark Hellinger Theater, I think it was, and to do this evening, Diaghilev evening, particularly works featuring Vaslav Nijinsky, these pieces that were created for him. Rudolph Nureyev looked a lot like Vaslav Nijinsky and had that same exoticism. So it was a very good fit. And we danced Petrushka, Afternoon of a Faun, and Spectre de la Rose. 3 very, very different ballets. I, as I say, was only in Joffrey 2, so I was woman with broom in Petrushka, but I was on stage with Rudolph Nureyev in a Broadway theater for 4 weeks. And
amazing.
Getting to watch him there again, I was just this little mouse in the wings, watching everything I could every night and learning from him and learning from my older colleagues. And it was just a thrilling thing.
And these ballets were really important ballets. They're the ballets of the Ballet Russe. And Diaghilev, who presented them originally, is probably the greatest presenter and impresario of all time. And these ballets created for Nijinsky because Nijinsky was so extraordinary, because he could leap up. I always think of him sort of in a Michael Jordan way. You know, he was somebody who could leap into the air and appear to stay there. Yeah. You know, just this amazing, amazing gift. So these ballets are really, they're mythic works. And then to have a mythic dancer like Rudolph dance them, it's just phenomenal.
And these works were really very rarely seen otherwise. These were beautifully reconstructed productions. I mean, Robert Joffrey's attention to detail was such that if it looked like fur, it had to be real fur, or you know, the costumes, the weight of them had to be just right. He really was so meticulous about every aspect of the performance and the stage and the costumes and the set and of course the dancing.
But that's really something in a ballet like Petrushka, which I urge people to go on to YouTube and look at Petrushka, because I mean, there's so many townspeople, you know, there's dozens of townspeople, and each one is, you know, one is cracking nuts, and you're the broom lady, and all these different people, they're all doing something, and they're all dressed individually. There's no chorus costume or something, you know.
And Robert Joffrey is responsible for why we're all actually doing something instead of just waving our hands, is because he would give us all each a character. He would walk around the stage, and even though I was just the woman with the broom, he gave me a little backstory so that you know, I owned that role, and that was already an education.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. So do you remember the backstory that he told you?
I'm sorry, I don't. I wish I did.
But the fact
that I'm sure I was a poor peasant woman who was just probably a little bit annoyed with this crowd who was messing up my front walkway, and I was continually sweeping to get the detritus off.
because it's like it's a walkway you'd already swept before, and now they're messing it up. So
I think it was along those lines. Now
yeah,
that I think of it, so
that's great.
yeah. So that gave me sort of a you know, a goal each night with my role, and we were incredibly lucky once again to get to film all of this for television, and we filmed that at the Grand Ole Opry on that stage because it's so enormous. It actually became a sound stage for us, and we did those same ballets once again, but were filmed, and we also filmed the Green Table.
Another great ballet. Yes, another great ballet. So that's also on YouTube. I mean, so really, I urge you as viewers to look at some of these things, because they're magical, and they will transport you into this world of dance and ballet. And you will also see, you know, the results of having an identity. If anybody ever had an identity as a dancer, it was Rudolf Nureyev, and you will see his total immersion in these roles that he's dancing, and his, you know, so it's really worth seeing. Now, as your career went on, did your sense of being or your sense of identity change?
Well, I know that there was a little bit of a push-pull inside of me. There was this side that came from uh, very much not a dance background, with coming back from parents who were teachers, thinking about my friends going to college and having this very other kind of life that I was not. At the same time, knowing that I had to immerse myself daily into total devotion to this art form, because that's what it requires. It requires such vigilance and continual physical training to really be able to keep up. So there was a little bit of a push-pull. When I was in the dance studio, I was sort of wishing I was at a ball game with friends, and if I was at a ball game with friends, I was thinking I should probably be back in the studio rehearsing. So these were both parts of my identity that were just finding their way towards the center, I suppose.
Right, and eventually did, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Now, when you, at some point, I think in 1989, you did leave the company. It was a difficult time, and you want to just talk about that a little bit?
Yes, of course. The scourge of AIDS was decimating the dance world. I lost many friends and colleagues, and at incredibly young ages, in their 20s, in their 30s. This was something we were not prepared for and didn't know really how to deal with. And it was devastating emotionally. Um, I think the final blow was when Robert Joffrey died in 1988, also of AIDS, but we hadn't been informed of that ahead of time. So we weren't really prepared, especially for that. And it really felt like all the air had gone out of me. I really had to step back and regroup and find some strength again. And it became clear that my time with the company was drawing to an end. Without him, he was sort of the lifeblood, the reason I was there, the man who was propelling me forward had died, and New York was beginning to feel like perhaps I needed perhaps somewhere quieter, a little bit more on a human scale. And so it was time. So in 1989, I did leave the company.
And then, but eventually, not so eventually, but not too long after, you do some freelancing, and then you end up dancing at Pennsylvania Ballet in Philadelphia.
Yes, I had realized that the two things I had never danced, that I wanted to be sure I attempted at least before I retired, were the full-length classical ballets such as Swan Lake, Coppelia, Sleeping Beauty, Giselle, and so on. And also the works of George Balanchine, which I had not really, we did not dance very often in the Joffrey Ballet. And it was another genre almost of ballet that I was eager to try. So fortunately, the director of the Pennsylvania Ballet, Christopher d'Amboise, who was the son of the legendary Jacques d'Amboise, had just taken over the company in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, and he invited me to join the company. And it just seemed like a good fit because those were the two things that the company was famous for: beautiful, lovingly coached and presented works by Balanchine, and beautiful full-length productions.
And so how long were you with Pennsylvania Ballet?
For 9 years.
9 years. But then, okay, so you get there in 1989, 90?
No, actually it was, I think it was just January of 91, I believe, because I had been freelancing before that.
And then in 98, you end up meeting somebody whose identity was also forged through ballet. Which is interesting because it's a man, and you had a rule up until that point: I don't date dancers. So
I did. I always felt like,
yeah.
I always felt like my time away from ballet with a partner would be enhanced by somebody who was not a dancer, and I did stick to that rule for many years. But then in 1998, as you mentioned, I met through a mutual friend my now husband, Jukka Aroma. And he was a Finnish dancer who had danced with New York City Ballet as a principal dancer for quite some time, then moved back to Europe and was looking to find a dance partner to do occasional performances in the States. And our mutual friend suggested we meet. So he came down to Philadelphia and we spent the day together, and things grew from there, shall we say.
Yeah, I think of it as love at first day.
It was love at first day, yeah, without realizing it at the time.
Yeah, yeah. And then, so you are together with Jukka, and how did you make the transition from dancing to teaching? How did that come about?
Well, I've always taught my entire dancing career during summer breaks, occasional guest teaching, master classes. I always kept my toe in the door of teaching because I love it, and it was a wonderful way to have a fuller career. Once I decided it was time to stop dancing, which was the year 2000, I actually had already been an adjunct adjunct professor at Bryn Mawr College the year before. I was teaching ballet at the college level and enjoying that very much. So it really was not a difficult segue to step off the stage and continue with the teaching. When I moved to Los Angeles, I wanted to go back home. I immediately found some teaching work and began to develop that side of my career.
But I think one of the reasons that you were so able to be a teacher is that you had always loved and valued the work in the studio, that the work had always meant a lot to you. There are these dancers who are more in it for the applause, and which means being on stage and dancing. And when the being on stage and dancing and the applause ends, it can be hard for people to get their sense of, they have to find a new identity. But your ballet identity it encompassed this idea of the work in the studio.
Yes, I did see friends who lived for the stage, having a very hard time after retiring. It felt like, I think, a part of them had died. And I would imagine that the identity I had forged by that time was somebody who liked to go deep into what I was doing. So if it was learning a role and preparing for it, that was fascinating. And it was in the studio. The end result, of course, was lovely. You got to perform it, and that was the final test. But it was the journey as much as the destination that was important to me. So teaching is another facet of that. It's going deep into inquiry, into the work. And it's still in a dance studio. And I get great pleasure from watching others' little light bulbs going off and the small epiphanies that come every day in a ballet class. A pirouette that suddenly is better because we found a little key to unlock that movement, and so on. So.
Well, I've watched you teach, and I've watched the girls that you teach, and one of the things that I've found about them is they carry themselves with tremendous femininity. I mean, ballet dancers can sometimes seem a little sterile, and your girls always have that it's a kind of womanliness, even in these very thin bodies and everything, and yet there would be a womanliness. I think part of it comes out of what you do with their arms.
That is the I would say the ballerina's crowning glory is how she uses her upper body and her arms. Of course, it's important what goes on down below with the feet and the legs and the turnout and the strength. But really what the audience is looking at more often than not is from the waist up, and the artistry that is being presented with the arms, the head, and so on. So I always felt it very important that they understood that. I'm glad to hear it showed.
Now, actually, this is a perfect segue into the little demonstration and lesson you're going to give us. So if you would like to get ready, you can turn off your camera, and I'll just talk about you a little bit while you're not here. I just want to say that those of you who have watched Lesley, I think one of the things that her being says to me is the way character influences character. It influences what you do, and beyond that, what you're good at. I think anybody beholding Lesley can see that there is a natural benevolence to her and a desire to bring out the best in other people and build them up. I know when I was teaching ballet history at the Colburn School, hired by Lesley to do so, I felt so appreciated and so supported in a way that I don't think I've ever felt at any other. I've done a lot of teaching, a lot of places, and Lesley just gave me such a sense of beyond approval, a sense that it was really interesting to her what I was doing, and that meant so much to me. And she was able to do that, I think, because she just has this very, very, very generous nature. she also has a very sunny kind of disposition. And I think when you combine that sunniness with the kind of calm that she has and the desire to build up others, that is a mix that gives you tremendous, makes you a superpowered teacher. And that is what she has always been. So I'm very excited for you to see this little step that she's going to show you. And there she is, looking very dancer-like. And Lesley, it's all yours. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your very kind words. So I'm standing in fifth position, but that is not important, what my legs are doing. I'd like to just talk about the arms for a moment, because it was very much the topic we were exploring earlier. So let's just think for a moment about how a dancer stands, because that affects everything. So that strong center we were talking about is this feeling of being held deep inside and being lifted slightly. And at the same time, we can imagine that there is a hand just over the head, and your head is trying to lift up and touch the hand. And that gives that long, beautiful spine that classical ballet requires. And I'm standing right now in en bas position with the arms. That en bas meaning in the lower position. En avant, also sometimes called first position. It's a big, beautiful round circle. En avant, or fifth en haut. And here the arms, if you can see, I'm going to lower it slightly. They're nicely rounded overhead, not behind me, but so I could look up and see my fingertips. And I'm just going to tilt the camera slightly. There we are. And then we open to à la seconde, second position. And notice there's a gentle slope to the shoulders so that we're not lifted here, but we're slightly lengthened down. And then we return to fifth en bas. All right. So let's see what that looks like when we put it together. Strong center, beautiful long spine, fifth en bas, en avant, en haut, à la seconde. Now we're going to reach and turn the hand slightly, lengthen, and it's like you've opened a parachute and you are going to slowly land with the arms. Once again, try that once more. We bring the arms from en bas, en avant, en haut, open out, and it's almost like a breath coming from the bottom of your spine. And we bring the arms back in. I want to mention something, that we have many moving parts to the arms, and that's what makes them so beautiful. We can move the arm from the shoulder, we can move the arm from the elbow, from the wrist, and each finger can have a life of its own as well. When we put that all together, we can see in a ballet, for instance, Swan Lake, where a ballet dancer's arms can suddenly become the wings of a swan. So think about all the moving parts and try with me. Elbows drop down, a little bit of bend in the wrist. Now the elbows lead the way, the fingers follow. And it's like great wings, spreading, reaching for the sky, and coming down. If it goes a little bit smaller and a little faster, we have rippling water. So you can see how very, very expressive the arms can be.
That's so beautiful. That's beautiful, Steph. It's just absolutely beautiful. Love that. I love the swan arms. They're just so amazing. There was a dancer, Susan Jaffe, who was dancing the swan at the Metropolitan Opera House in New York. And as she went off the stage doing the swan arms, she heard somebody in the first row say to her husband, "Oh my goodness, Henry, the girl has no bones." That's really what that looks like. So thank you so much.
That's our goal, is to remove all the angles and evoke something softer and otherworldly with our arms.
And that is otherworldly. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now, as we conclude our segment, I encourage you to step into this extraordinary world and discover ballet as an exceptional instrument for tapping into your full potential and unlocking your unique talents. And please visit thefirstguild.com for more information and inspiration. And join us, please, as we continue our exciting journey into the world of ballet and identity. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And goodbye for now.